At 11:42 p.m., the fire on Harrison Avenue had already consumed the fourth floor of the apartment building. Smoke poured from broken windows. Flames climbed the exterior walls. Sirens echoed between the surrounding buildings as firefighters moved through the entrance, carrying hoses and breathing equipment. Captain Daniel Cross arrived less than 2 minutes after the first alarm. He was 46 years old and had spent more than 20 years running toward buildings. Everyone else was desperate to escape. He immediately began organizing the rescue. Third floor first. Check every apartment. Keep the stairwell clear. Within minutes, firefighters began bringing residents outside. An elderly couple, a young woman, a man carrying a cat, a father with smoke-covered clothes, then another survivor, then another. 17 people were rescued. 17 lives pulled from a building that was rapidly becoming impossible to enter. The crowd gathered across the street began cheering every time another person emerged. But the cheers stopped when someone shouted, "There's still a man upstairs." A woman pointed toward the fourth floor. "Apartment for B. My brother lives there." Daniel looked toward the building. His breathing slowed. The fourth floor was almost completely engulfed. The stairwell temperature had become dangerously high. The roof above the western section was beginning to sag. A firefighter beside Daniel looked at the building and said, "Captain, we have maybe 2 minutes." Daniel nodded. Then he did something nobody expected. He looked toward the fourth floor and ordered everyone to stop. "Pull the crews back." The firefighter stared at him. "Captain, everyone out. But there's a victim." Daniel raised his voice. "Now." The command spread through the team. Firefighters began retreating. The woman across the street screamed, "You're leaving him." Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he stared at one apartment window. Apartment 4B. The window was closed. No light came through it. No movement. No silhouette. Nothing. Yet Daniel looked at it as though he knew exactly what was happening behind that glass. He removed his helmet, checked his radio, then said something quietly that only the firefighter standing beside him could hear. "Do not let anyone go back inside." The firefighter asked why. Daniel looked at him. "Because if I'm right, everyone in that building is about to die." 30 seconds later, the eastern side of the fourth floor collapsed. Concrete and steel crashed through the rooms. The crowd screamed. Firefighters shielded themselves as debris exploded across the street. The woman who had been demanding that Daniel return inside began crying. She believed her brother was dead. Daniel said nothing. He simply watched the building burn. By 1:16 a.m., the fire was finally under control. The official count was 17 people rescued, 1 person missing. Daniel Cross immediately became the center of the investigation. The missing man's name was Ethan Walker, 38 years old. Apartment 4B, no criminal record, no known medical condition. No obvious reason for Daniel's strange decision. By sunrise, television reporters were already asking the same question. Why did the captain stop the rescue when he knew someone was still inside? Daniel refused every interview. He only said one sentence: "I made the decision I had to make." That answer wasn't enough. The victim's sister accused him publicly of abandoning Ethan. The department placed Daniel on administrative leave. An internal investigation began, and by the end of the day, the city had already chosen a villain. But nobody had seen what Daniel had seen. Nobody knew about the locked apartment. Nobody knew what he had noticed near the doorway. And most importantly, nobody knew that across the street, inside an old convenience store, a security camera had been recording the entire fourth floor exterior for the last 6 months. 3 days later, investigators recovered that footage. At first, it appeared useless. Smoke, flames, firefighters moving across the street. But an investigator slowed the recording down, then stopped it. There, just 40 seconds before Daniel ordered the evacuation, something appeared inside the window of apartment 4B, something that changed the entire investigation, because Ethan Walker was not alone in that apartment. The investigator froze the footage. Everyone in the room leaned toward the monitor. The image was grainy. Smoke covered most of the fourth floor. The camera was positioned across Harrison Avenue, nearly 200 feet from the building. But after enhancing the recording, a shape became visible behind the window of apartment 4B. Ethan Walker was there, but he wasn't alone. Someone was standing behind him, a second figure. The investigator zoomed in. The figure appeared to be wearing dark clothing. Its face couldn't be seen. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan turned toward the person. He raised both hands, not in fear, almost as if he were trying to explain something. The second figure stepped closer. Then the apartment lights went off. 6 seconds later, smoke began pouring from the window. The investigator looked at the timestamp. 11 hours, 41 minutes, and 18 seconds p.m., less than 1 minute before Daniel ordered the crews out. The department immediately contacted Daniel. He arrived at headquarters without his uniform. The investigation room was silent when he entered. The investigator played the recording. Daniel watched it once, then looked away. "You knew." Daniel didn't answer. The investigator replayed the footage. "You knew Ethan wasn't alone." Still nothing. Finally, Daniel said, "I knew there was someone else in that apartment. Who? I don't know." The investigator stared at him. You ran into that building 20 years ago. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What does that have to do with this? The investigator paused the recording. Because the same symbol was found on the apartment door. A photograph appeared on the screen. Near the handle of apartment 4B was a small black marking. 3 vertical lines. Daniel's expression changed instantly. He recognized it. The investigator noticed. You've seen that before? Daniel slowly sat down. 22 years ago. The room became quiet. Daniel explained that when he was a rookie firefighter, he responded to a warehouse fire on the eastern side of the city. The building had been abandoned. No residents. No reason for anyone to be inside. Yet firefighters discovered a locked room beneath the structure. On the door was the exact same symbol. 3 vertical lines. Inside, they found dozens of sealed metal containers. The fire department turned everything over to investigators. But before Daniel could learn what had been inside those containers, the evidence disappeared. The case was quietly closed. The department was told the building had been used for illegal storage. Daniel never believed that explanation. And now, the same symbol had appeared on apartment 4B. The investigator asked, did Ethan know about it? Daniel shook his head. That's what I was trying to determine. Then, another detail appeared in the footage. The mysterious second figure left the apartment, not through the hallway, not through the fire escape, through a small window on the western side. The investigator enlarged the image. The figure climbed onto a narrow external platform, then disappeared behind a neighboring building. Daniel stared at the screen. There's another camera. The investigator looked at him. How do you know? Daniel pointed toward the roofline. Because the building across from 4B has a loading dock. There's a camera above it. The investigators checked. The footage existed. They pulled the recording. This time, the image was much clearer. At 11:40 p.m., a black sedan stopped behind the apartment building. A man stepped out. He looked toward the 4th floor. Then he removed something from the trunk, a metal case. He entered through the rear service entrance. 7 minutes later, the fire began. The investigator stared at Daniel. This wasn't an accident. Daniel shook his head. No. He pointed toward the screen. Someone started that fire. But there was an even bigger problem. The timestamp showed the man entering the building at 11:40. The fire alarm wasn't triggered until 11:42. That meant the man had exactly 2 minutes inside. 2 minutes before the smoke began. 2 minutes before Daniel arrived. 2 minutes before 17 people needed to be rescued. The investigator asked, why would someone start a fire just to get into apartment 4B? Daniel answered quietly, because whatever was in that apartment was worth killing for. Then the room went silent. The investigator opened Ethan Walker's background file. No criminal history, no suspicious financial activity, no obvious connection to the warehouse fire. But then they found something. Ethan had worked for the city 20 years earlier. Not as a firefighter, not as a police officer. He had been a building safety inspector. Daniel looked at the photograph. He recognized Ethan immediately, not from apartment 4B, from the warehouse. 22 years earlier, Ethan Walker had been the young inspector who discovered the hidden room beneath the burning warehouse. The same room where Daniel first saw the strange symbol. The same case that mysteriously vanished. Daniel slowly stood. The fire wasn't about Ethan. The investigator looked at him. Then what was it about? Daniel pointed to the apartment. Ethan found something 22 years ago, and whoever started this fire believed he still had it. But there was one problem. Ethan had been inside the apartment when the fire started. The question was no longer why Daniel refused to rescue him. The question was, why did Daniel know Ethan might have deliberately stayed behind? Because 40 seconds before the evacuation order, the security footage showed Ethan doing something nobody had noticed. He looked directly toward the camera and raised one finger to his lips, as if telling someone, "Don't come in." Daniel saw it, and suddenly, the reason he ordered every firefighter out became much clearer. But before Daniel could explain, a firefighter burst into the investigation room. "Captain, we found Ethan Walker." Daniel turned. "Where?" The firefighter looked terrified. 3 blocks away. He's alive." Daniel's face went completely still. Then the firefighter added, "But he won't tell us what happened." Because Ethan Walker hadn't been trapped inside apartment 4B. He had been waiting for someone to find him, and what he was carrying was the reason someone had set the entire building on fire. Ethan Walker was found 3 blocks from Harrison Avenue. He wasn't injured. He wasn't running. He was sitting inside an abandoned diner with a cup of coffee in front of him, as if nothing had happened. When Daniel entered the room, Ethan looked up. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Ethan smiled. "You finally saw the footage." Daniel stopped. "What did you expect me to do?" "Exactly what you did." Daniel's expression hardened. 17 people were inside that building. "I know. You knew the fire was coming. I knew the collapse was coming. Then why were you inside?" Ethan looked toward the window. "Because someone wanted me there." Daniel sat across from him. "Who?" Ethan reached into his jacket and placed a small metal container on the table. The same type of container Daniel had seen 22 years earlier beneath the abandoned warehouse. 3 vertical lines were engraved across the lid. Daniel stared at it. "You still have it." Ethan nodded. I've had it for 22 years. What's inside? Ethan looked directly at him. The reason people died? Daniel slowly opened the container. Inside was a collection of old photographs, inspection reports, handwritten notes, and a small flash drive. But one photograph immediately caught Daniel's attention. It showed the warehouse fire from 22 years ago. Firefighters stood outside. Smoke rose behind them, and near the edge of the photograph stood a young Ethan Walker. Beside him was another man. Daniel recognized him immediately. The current owner of Harrison Avenue Apartments. Daniel felt a chill. He was there. Ethan nodded. He was there that night. Who is he? Someone who has spent 22 years making sure nobody asks the right questions. Ethan explained that when he was a young building inspector, he discovered something beneath the warehouse. The containers weren't storing illegal materials. They contained documents from several apartment buildings across the city. Building inspection reports, safety violations, hidden structural problems. Every report showed the same pattern. Owners were being warned about dangerous conditions. Then the reports disappeared. Buildings were sold. Renovations were approved. And whenever someone threatened to expose what was happening, a fire followed. Daniel stared at the reports. You're saying they were deliberately burning buildings? Ethan nodded. Not just buildings. Evidence. The flash drive contained copies of old city records, dozens of properties, dozens of missing reports, dozens of fires, all connected. Daniel remembered the warehouse, the hidden room, the containers, the symbol on the door. Everything finally made sense. But there was still one question. Why Harrison Avenue? Ethan looked at him. Because apartment 4B contained the last original document. Daniel leaned forward. What document? Ethan hesitated. The master inspection report. Daniel frowned. Master report? The one connecting every building. The room became silent. Ethan continued. It named the people who approved the false inspections, the contractors who paid them, and the officials who protected the entire operation. Daniel looked toward the container. Where is it? Ethan smiled. You're sitting on it. Daniel looked down. There was a folded envelope beneath his chair. He picked it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the top was a list of names. At the bottom, one name had been circled. Daniel's. His hands froze. Ethan watched him carefully. They knew you would be there. Daniel looked up. You're saying this fire was designed to put me on the scene? No. Ethan shook his head. It was designed to make you choose. Daniel remembered the moment. The fourth floor. Apartment 4B. The window. The mysterious figure. The woman's voice screaming that her brother was still inside. Everything had been designed to force him into one decision. If Daniel sent firefighters inside, they would die. If he ordered them out, the world would call him a coward. Either way, someone would win. Daniel looked at Ethan, who was the second person in the apartment. Ethan's face changed. You saw her? Daniel nodded. Security camera. Ethan lowered his eyes. She wasn't there to hurt me then. Who was she? Ethan reached into his pocket and placed another photograph on the table. A young woman, late 20s, standing beside a city inspection vehicle. Daniel stared at the picture. He recognized her. She had been one of the investigators who arrived at the warehouse fire 22 years earlier. Daniel slowly looked at Ethan. She disappeared. Ethan nodded. She discovered the same evidence I did. What happened to her? We were told she left the city. Daniel shook his head. That wasn't true. No, she was one of the people they erased. Then Ethan revealed the final part of the plan. The woman had contacted him weeks earlier. She had found out that the master inspection report was still hidden inside apartment 4B, but she couldn't retrieve it alone. They needed someone who knew exactly how the building would collapse. They needed Daniel, not because they wanted him to enter, because they needed him to recognize the danger and stop everyone else from entering. Daniel stared at Ethan. So the fire wasn't meant to kill us. Ethan shook his head. It was meant to bury the evidence. Then why did the apartment collapse? Because someone changed the plan. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Ethan pointed toward the security footage. The person who started the fire wasn't working alone. There was another person inside. Someone who wanted everyone to believe I died. Daniel stood. Who? Ethan looked toward the door, then quietly said, the same man who just called the fire department and reported that I was trapped inside. Daniel's radio suddenly crackled. A dispatcher spoke through the static. Captain Cross, we have another fire. Daniel picked up the radio. Location. The dispatcher gave the address. Daniel's face went pale. It was the old warehouse. The same building where the mystery had begun. 22 years earlier, Ethan stood. They know we found the file. Daniel grabbed his helmet. Then we stopped running. Outside, sirens began screaming through the city. And as Daniel and Ethan stepped into the night, Daniel realized something terrifying. The next fire wasn't meant to destroy a building. It was meant to destroy the final witness. And this time, Daniel knew exactly who the target was. The old warehouse was already glowing orange when Daniel and Ethan arrived. The building had been abandoned for more than 2 decades, yet flames were pouring through windows that had been boarded shut for years. Fire alarms echoed from somewhere inside. Daniel immediately noticed something that made his stomach tighten. There were no nearby residents. no businesses, no reason for anyone to be inside. This fire wasn't an accident, it was a message. Daniel stepped out of the engine and looked toward the roof. The structure had changed since the night 22 years earlier, but the weak points were exactly where he remembered them. Ethan stood beside him. They're destroying the evidence. Daniel shook his head. Not all of it. What do you mean? Daniel pointed toward the rear wall. There's a basement. Ethan stared at him. The plans say there isn't. The plans were changed. Daniel remembered the hidden room from 22 years earlier. The room that had disappeared from every official record. The room that had contained the metal containers. The room that had started everything. He turned toward his crew. Establish a perimeter. A firefighter approached. Captain, we're not going inside. Daniel shook his head. Not yet. He looked at Ethan. Where's the report? Ethan reached into his coat. Safe. Daniel nodded. Then, we have what they want. A loud crack echoed from inside the warehouse. Part of the roof shifted. Daniel stepped backward. Everyone stay out. The same order, the same decision. But this time, no one questioned him. For 22 years, Daniel had been called a coward for refusing to enter a burning building. Tonight, his crew trusted him completely. Then a figure appeared behind the smoke. A woman. She stumbled through a side doorway. Daniel immediately recognized her. The woman from the photograph. The investigator, everyone believed, had disappeared 22 years earlier. She was alive. Ethan ran toward her. Sarah. She grabbed his arm. They found me. She looked toward the warehouse. Everyone. Daniel moved closer. What happened? Sarah pointed toward the burning building. They weren't trying to burn the evidence. Daniel frowned. Then what were they trying to do? Sarah looked at Ethan. They were trying to make us believe the evidence was inside. Ethan froze. What? Sarah explained that the master inspection report had never been kept inside the warehouse. The metal containers had been decoys. The real evidence had been hidden somewhere no one would think to search. Daniel immediately understood. Apartment for B. Sarah nodded. Exactly. Daniel's expression changed. The fire on Harrison Avenue was a distraction. Yes. Then the person who started it wanted us looking there. Sarah nodded. And while everyone watched the building burn, they entered another location. Ethan looked at Daniel. Where? Sarah answered. Station 18. Daniel's blood ran cold. His own fire station. The place where old records, training archives, and emergency recordings had been stored for decades. If someone had entered Station 18, they weren't looking for the master report. They were looking for something even more dangerous. Evidence that Daniel had kept hidden for 22 years. His father's original investigation notes. Daniel grabbed his radio. Station 18, this is Cross. Nothing. He tried again. Station 18, respond, static. Then a voice, not the dispatcher, not one of his firefighters, a stranger. Captain Cross. Daniel froze. The voice continued, you should have stayed out of the past. Daniel looked at Ethan. Who is this? A pause? Then ask yourself why your name was on the original inspection report. Daniel's expression hardened. You already know the answer. No. The voice laughed quietly. You only think you do. Then the radio went dead. Daniel turned toward his crew. We're going to Station 18. One firefighter looked at the burning warehouse. What about this? Daniel looked at the building, let it burn. The decision stunned everyone. But Daniel wasn't abandoning the evidence. For the first time, he understood that the fire itself wasn't the target, it was the distraction. They drove through the city with sirens screaming. When they reached Station 18, the main doors were open. The lights were off. No firefighters were visible. Daniel stepped inside. The station was silent, too silent. Equipment remained exactly where it had been. Coffee cup sat untouched in the kitchen. A newspaper lay open on the table. Everything looked normal, except for the hallway. One storage room door stood open. Daniel walked toward it. Inside, dozens of archive boxes had been opened. Old fire investigation reports were scattered across the floor. Ethan picked one up. He recognized the handwriting. That's yours. Daniel stared at the page. It was an inspection report from 22 years earlier. His own signature was at the bottom. But there was something wrong. Someone had changed the final paragraph. Daniel remembered exactly what he had written. The original report had warned that the warehouse contained a hidden structure and that several emergency access routes had been deliberately sealed. The version in the archive said something completely different. It stated no structural irregularities found. Daniel stared at the false report. They changed my report. Ethan nodded. And they made you look incompetent if anything went wrong. Daniel turned the page. Behind it was the second document, the original, the one he had written 22 years ago. There was a handwritten note at the bottom. If this report is ever found, Daniel Cross is not the problem. Beneath that, another name. The name of the official who had ordered the original report, altered. Daniel recognized him, the city's former fire commissioner, a man who had died 6 years earlier. But the handwriting beneath the name was recent. Someone was still following the same operation. Someone had inherited the system. Then Ethan found a small flash drive taped beneath the archive shelf. He plugged it into the station computer. A single video file appeared. Harrison Avenue, 11:42 p.m. Daniel opened it. The security footage showed the burning apartment building. But this time, it wasn't from across the street. It was from inside apartment 4B. The footage showed Ethan entering the apartment before the fire, then Sarah, then another man. Daniel stared at the screen. He recognized him immediately. The man who had been standing in the shadows during the original investigation. The man who had been present 22 years earlier. The man who had just spoken through Daniel's radio. Daniel whispered, "He's still alive." Ethan looked at him. "Who?" Daniel pointed toward the screen. "The man who started all of this." The video continued. The man placed a metal case on the floor. Inside was the master report. He looked directly at the camera, then said, "Let Cross come." The recording ended. Daniel stared at the screen. He finally understood the real plan. The fire wasn't meant to kill Ethan. It wasn't even meant to destroy the report. It was designed to force Daniel back into the investigation. Someone wanted him to follow the evidence. Someone wanted him to uncover the entire network. And someone had been watching him for 22 years, waiting for the moment he became impossible to silence. Then the station's emergency alarm suddenly activated. Every light turned red. A dispatcher shouted through the radio, "Captain Cross, we have an active fire at Station 18. Daniel looked around the room. The station itself was beginning to fill with smoke. Ethan stepped backward. "They followed us." Daniel grabbed his helmet, then smiled. Not because he wasn't afraid, because for the first time, he knew exactly what he was fighting. And somewhere inside the burning station, the man from the video was waiting for him. Smoke filled Station 18 within seconds. Emergency lights flashed across the walls as Daniel ordered everyone toward the front entrance. But before leaving, he looked toward the archive room. "The evidence is still inside." Ethan shook his head. "Forget the evidence." Daniel looked at him. "That's what they want." "What?" "They want us to believe the evidence is more important than the people." Daniel grabbed his radio. "Everyone out." His firefighters obeyed immediately. For once, nobody questioned the order. Daniel and Ethan moved through the smoke toward the rear corridor. The fire had started near the electrical room. But Daniel noticed something strange. The flames weren't spreading naturally. They were moving toward the archive. Someone had deliberately started multiple fires. Someone wanted the records destroyed. Daniel looked toward the ceiling. The smoke pattern told him something else. The fires being controlled. Ethan stared at him. "How?" "Ventilation." Daniel pointed toward the old air system. Someone opened the emergency dampers. The flames suddenly intensified. Daniel understood. Whoever had started the fire knew exactly how the building worked. And that meant they knew the station from the inside. They reached the archive. The door was partially blocked. Daniel forced it open. Inside, the entire room was filling with smoke. Boxes were burning. Documents were scattered across the floor. Ethan pointed toward the computer. The video, Daniel rushed toward it. The screen was still running. The footage showed the man from apartment 4B standing beside the metal case. This time, his face was visible. Daniel stared. He knew him. Robert Vance, former deputy fire commissioner. The same man whose name appeared beneath Daniel's altered inspection report. The same man everyone believed had died 6 years earlier. Ethan stared at the screen. "He's alive." Daniel nodded. "And he's been controlling everything." Suddenly, the video changed. Robert Vance looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, Daniel, I knew you'd come." Daniel froze. Vance continued. 22 years ago, you found the warehouse. You saw the containers. You saw the reports. But you never saw the entire system. The screen showed photographs of dozens of buildings. Apartment complexes, warehouses, factories, schools. Each had the same symbol. 3 vertical lines. Vance continued. "We didn't create dangerous buildings. We created opportunities. When someone wanted a building gone, we made sure the paperwork disappeared. When someone asked questions, we made sure they disappeared too." Ethan looked horrified. Daniel remained silent. The recording continued. "But you were different. You kept your report. You kept asking questions. And you survived." Then Vance revealed the final secret. The man everyone thought was responsible for starting the fires wasn't me. Daniel stared at the screen. "What?" Vance smiled. "He was your own fire captain." Daniel's face went pale. The video showed an old photograph from 22 years earlier. Daniel recognized the captain immediately. His mentor, the man who had trained him, the man who had signed the original investigation, the man Daniel had trusted more than anyone. Vance's voice continued. "He ordered the warehouse fire. He ordered the reports changed. And when he realized you knew too much, he ordered you removed from the investigation." Daniel shook his head. "No." Ethan looked at him. "You knew him." Daniel nodded slowly. "He was like a father to..." Vance continued. "The reason I stayed hidden wasn't to control you. It was to expose him." The video suddenly showed a second recording. An elderly man's voice. Daniel recognized it immediately. His former captain. The recording was dated 22 years earlier. "You'll take care of the reports. Cross won't understand what he's seeing. And if he asks questions, we'll handle it." Daniel closed his eyes. For 22 years, he had blamed the wrong person. The man he believed had betrayed him had actually been gathering evidence against the person Daniel trusted most. Vance hadn't started the entire conspiracy. He had infiltrated it. He had spent decades collecting proof. The warehouse fire, Harrison Avenue, Station 18. Each fire had been designed to force the hidden operation into the open. Daniel suddenly understood why Vance had allowed him to survive, why Ethan had been protected, why Sarah had disappeared, why the old reports had survived. Someone had been building a case, quietly, patiently, waiting for enough evidence to expose everyone involved. The station's ceiling groaned above them. Daniel looked toward Ethan. "We have to go." They grabbed the computer drive and ran. The hallway filled with smoke. A section of ceiling collapsed behind them. Daniel pushed Ethan through the exit. Seconds later, the archive room erupted in flames. Firefighters outside rushed toward them. Daniel collapsed onto the pavement. Ethan knelt beside him. "You okay?" Daniel nodded, then looked toward the burning station. The evidence survived. Ethan held up the drive. All of it. Within hours, federal investigators had the files, the original reports, the altered reports, the recordings, the surveillance footage, the photographs, everything. Robert Vance voluntarily surrendered to authorities 2 days later. The investigation lasted months. The network was dismantled. Former officials were arrested. Illegal property schemes were exposed. Families whose homes had been destroyed received compensation. And the symbol of the 3 vertical lines became one of the most important clues in the entire investigation. But Daniel never celebrated. He returned to Station 18 after it was rebuilt. One evening, Ethan found him standing alone in the archive room. The shelves were empty. The walls smelled new. Daniel looked at the new building. 22 years. Ethan nodded. "You could have walked away." Daniel smiled. "So could you." They stood in silence. Then Ethan asked the question he had been avoiding. "Why didn't you save the man in apartment for B?" Daniel looked at him. "I did." Ethan frowned. "You mean the man everyone thought you abandoned?" Daniel nodded. "That was Ethan's old identity. I wasn't trying to save him from the fire. I was trying to save his evidence." Ethan understood. The security camera had shown the truth. Daniel hadn't abandoned anyone. He had recognized that the fire was a trap. If the firefighters entered, they would have been buried. If Ethan was inside, the evidence would have disappeared. Daniel chose the only option that kept the investigation alive. And because of that decision, 17 people survived. The evidence survived, and the truth finally came out. Months later, Daniel was formally cleared. The department gave him a new commendation. But when reporters asked how he felt about being called a coward, Daniel simply smiled. Sometimes, doing the right thing looks wrong from the outside. He refused every interview after that. Instead, he returned to Station 18. He trained younger firefighters. He taught them what his own mentor had once taught him. But he added one sentence of his own: "Never confuse courage with running toward danger." Years later, a memorial plaque was placed outside Station 18. It honored the 17 people Daniel had helped save. It also carried one final sentence: "Courage is not always entering the fire. Sometimes it is knowing when not to." And every year, on the anniversary of the Harrison Avenue fire, 17 families returned to Station 18. Some brought flowers, others brought photographs. But one woman always stood quietly at the back. Sarah, the investigator everyone thought had disappeared 22 years earlier. She never spoke to reporters. She simply placed one flower beneath the plaque and walked away. Daniel watched her disappear into the crowd. He smiled, because he finally understood something. The fire had never been about one building. The camera had never been about one man. The investigation had never been about one firefighter. It was about the truth. A truth that had survived 22 years of lies. And when the world finally saw the footage, the man they had called a coward was revealed for what he had always been. A firefighter who knew exactly when to run into the fire and exactly when to stand outside it. If this story kept you watching until the end, tell us in the comments, would you have trusted Daniel's decision when everyone else called him a coward? And tell us what city or country you're watching from. If you enjoy cinematic firefighter mysteries with hidden evidence, impossible decisions, unexpected twists, and emotional endings, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and join us for the next story. Because every fire leaves evidence. And sometimes, the most important thing a firefighter can save is the truth.